The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the email. It was the silence before it. 8 months into the job, I had learned the rhythms of the place. The elevators hummed differently after 6. The office lights dimmed in sections, like the building itself was getting tired. People packed up quietly, avoiding eye contact, already halfway home in their heads. By the time I shut down my computer that night, the floor was nearly empty. That was when my phone buzzed. No subject line. Just my name. "Can you come up for a few minutes?" It was sent from an assistant I'd never spoken to directly. No explanation, no urgency in the wording, but something in the timing made my stomach tighten. The CEO didn't work late. Everyone knew that. He was known for efficiency, not presence. Sharp meetings, short appearances, then gone. You didn't get summoned after hours unless something had gone wrong, or unless you were about to be let go. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the screen, my coat already draped over my arm. Around me, the office felt hollow. Desks dark. Chairs pushed in. A forgotten coffee mug sat on a cubicle wall, ringed with dried foam. Outside the windows, the city was turning blue, that quiet hour when the buildings look closer than they are. I told myself I was overthinking it. I always did that. 8 months wasn't nothing. 8 months of early mornings, careful emails, staying late without being asked. 8 months of making myself smaller in meetings so I wouldn't be noticed for the wrong reasons. I hadn't made any big mistakes, not that I knew of. I hadn't been written up. I hadn't even been pulled aside. Still, my chest felt tight as I walked to the elevators. The ride up was silent. No music, no small talk, just the soft whir of cables and the reflection of my own face in the brushed metal walls. I looked older than I felt, tired, but not in a dramatic way. Just worn around the eyes, like someone who'd learned to expect disappointment before it arrived. When the doors opened, the executive floor felt colder than the rest of the building. Fewer cubicles, more glass, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, just controlled. His assistant met me halfway down the hall. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that doesn't reveal anything. "He's in his office," she said. "You can go right in. No, good luck. No, this won't take long." I nodded, adjusted my grip on my coat, and walked the rest of the way alone. The office door was open. He was standing, not sitting. That struck me immediately. Most people sat behind their desks like shields. He stood near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest he worked harder than everyone else in the room. When he turned, his expression wasn't angry. That was worse. It was something quieter, studied, like he'd already decided something and was just waiting to see if I'd confirm it. "Thanks for coming up," he said. His voice was calm, almost kind. "Of course," I replied, and heard how small my voice sounded in the space. He gestured toward a chair. I didn't sit right away. I hesitated, then took it slowly, setting my coat across my lap like a shield. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, traffic slid along the streets below, tiny lines of light moving with purpose. The city didn't care what happened in this room. That thought grounded me more than it should have. "You've been here 8 months, he said finally. I nodded. "Yes." "Time goes fast," he added. "It does." Another pause. He didn't look at his computer, didn't shuffle papers. His attention stayed on me, steady and unreadable. It made me acutely aware of my posture, my breathing, the way my fingers tightened around the fabric of my coat. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay, why did you take this job?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't what I'd rehearsed for on the elevator ride up. I'd prepared apologies, explanations, justifications I didn't even know I'd need. "I needed work," I said honestly, "and I believed in what the company was building." He watched me closely, like he was listening for what I didn't say. "Before that?" he asked. I swallowed. "Before that, I was freelancing. And before that, there it was, the place people usually didn't go, the gap in my resume that recruiters glanced over politely and then pretended not to see. I was at another firm," I said. He waited. "I left. Not a lie. Just incomplete." He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something for him. He turned back toward the window, resting one hand on the glass. "You're good at your job," he said. "Quiet, reliable. You don't draw attention to yourself." I didn't know whether to thank him or brace myself. "That's not always a compliment," he continued. I said nothing. "You show up early, you stay late, you don't complain. But you also don't ask for much." He turned back toward me. Why is that? The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had leaned in. I try to be respectful, I said, of people's time. That's not what I asked. Another silence. I could feel my pulse in my ears now, a familiar sensation, the one that came right before a door closed or opened in a way you couldn't undo. I've noticed things, he said. Patterns. My mouth went dry. You avoid certain meetings. You decline invitations that would put you in front of clients. You reroute conversations to email when they get personal. I hadn't realized it was that obvious. He took a breath and said, "This isn't about performance. That should have been a relief. It wasn't." "Then what is it about?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder. No label, no name. He didn't open it. He just held it there, resting against the edge of the desk. "For 8 months," he said. "I've been trying to decide whether to talk to you." My heart dropped. About what? He looked at me then, really looked, like he was weighing the cost of the next sentence, about something that happened long before you got here. The air in the room shifted. I could feel it, that low hum of recognition, even before the memory surfaced fully. "I don't understand," I said, though a part of me already did. He nodded once. "I know." He set the folder back into the drawer, closing it gently as if the sound mattered. "I'm not here to accuse you of anything," he said, "and I'm not here to fire you." My shoulders dropped slightly despite myself. "But," he added, "there's a reason I asked you up here tonight, and it has nothing to do with quarterly numbers or missed deadlines." He walked back toward his desk, stopping just short of it. "8 months ago," he said, "you walked into this building carrying more than you let on." My fingers tightened around my coat again. "I want to know why." I searched his face for anger, for judgment, for something I could push against. There was none, just patience, and that scared me more than anything else. Because patience meant he wasn't guessing. He already knew something, and whatever it was, it had waited 8 months to find its way back to me. I left his office without a resolution, which somehow felt heavier than leaving with bad news. He told me to take the night. Said we'd talk again soon. Not tomorrow, not urgently, just soon. The way he said it suggested time was something he'd already spent thinking about this. The elevator ride down felt longer than the one up. I watched the floor numbers tick by, my reflection staring back at me again, only now it looked like someone who had been seen too clearly. Outside, the city had darkened. The sidewalks were wet from a light rain that must have passed while I was upstairs. Everything reflected light. Street lamps, brake lights, storefront signs, making the night feel louder than it really was. I didn't go straight home. I rarely did anymore. Instead, I walked. That had become my habit over the last 8 months. When my thoughts got crowded, I walked until they spread out enough to breathe, past the late-night deli on the corner, past the bus stop where the same man always slept sitting up, his shoes lined neatly beneath the bench, past the small park where the lights flickered like they might give up any minute. I kept my coat on even though it wasn't cold. I needed the weight of it, something solid against my chest. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't take it out. If it was work, it could wait. If it was anyone else, I wasn't ready. 8 months. That number echoed with every step. I'd told myself this job was a fresh start, a place to be invisible while I rebuilt something inside myself. I hadn't planned on staying quiet forever, just long enough to feel steady again, long enough to trust my own voice. But quiet has a way of becoming permanent if you let it. By the time I reached my apartment, my legs ached and my head throbbed dully, like a warning I'd learned to ignore. The place was small, 1 bedroom, clean but impersonal. I'd moved in quickly when I got the offer, telling myself I'd decorate later. Later never came. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and hung my coat carefully, smoothing the sleeve the way my mother used to do without thinking. Then I stood there, staring at nothing. On the kitchen counter sat a folded envelope. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. I knew what it was before I touched it. I'd been pretending not to. I picked it up slowly, like it might burn me. The paper felt thicker than usual, more deliberate. Inside was a single sheet. I didn't read it right away. I sat down at the small table instead, the one that wobbled slightly if you leaned too hard on it. I placed the letter in front of me and rested my hands flat on either side, grounding myself. Then I unfolded it. It was short. Just a few paragraphs. No accusations, no threats, just facts, dates, a name I hadn't spoken out loud in years. Ethan Moore. My breath caught when I saw it, even though I'd known it would be there. The letter didn't say what I expected it to say. It didn't demand money or silence. It didn't threaten exposure. It asked for a meeting. That was all. No signature, just a phone number at the bottom. I read it 3 times, slower each time, as if a different meaning might appear if I looked hard enough. It didn't. I folded the paper back up and slid it into the envelope, then pushed it away like it might crawl back toward me on its own. That was the relatable problem, I supposed. The one people rarely talk about because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. The past doesn't stay past just because you avoid it. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't want and let it go cold on the counter. I showered longer than necessary, letting the water beat against my shoulders until my skin turned red. I lay in bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling until the lines between the panels blurred. At some point, sleep found me anyway. It always does, eventually, but it wasn't kind. I dreamed of conference rooms with no doors, of faces I couldn't quite see, of someone calling my name from behind a glass wall, their mouth moving without sound. I woke before my alarm, heart racing, the room still dark. For a few seconds I didn't know where I was. Then the familiar shapes returned. The dresser, the chair with clothes draped over it, the faint glow of the streetlight through the blinds. I sat up slowly and pressed my palms into my eyes until stars flared behind them. Going to work felt like a test I hadn't studied for. I dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors, nothing that might draw attention. I ate a piece of toast standing up and left the apartment without looking back at the envelope on the table. The office buzzed with its usual low hum when I arrived. Keyboards clicking, someone laughing softly near the break room, the smell of burnt coffee. Everything was the same, and that made it harder. "Morning, Sarah," Mark said as I passed his desk. "Morning," I replied, forcing a small smile. Mark had been there longer than anyone else on our floor. He knew everyone's habits, everyone's tells. He'd noticed my quietness early on, but he never pushed. I appreciated that more than he probably knew. I sat at my desk and logged in, my fingers moving automatically. Emails, calendars, tasks, all the little things that made up a day and kept bigger thoughts at bay. Around 10, my manager stopped by. "Quick check-in later?" she asked. "Nothing major." "Sure," I said. She nodded and moved on. I spent the rest of the morning doing what I always did, fixing small problems before they became big ones, cleaning up documents no one else wanted to touch, making myself useful without being visible. At noon, I took my lunch to the stairwell instead of the break room. It was quieter there. The echo of footsteps came and went, but no one stayed long. I sat on the cold concrete step and unwrapped my sandwich slowly, barely tasting it. My phone sat beside me, face down. I didn't need to check it to know there were missed calls. After lunch, the meeting with my manager came and went uneventfully. She talked about upcoming projects, potential growth, asked how I was settling in. "I'm good," I said, because that was easier than explaining anything else. She smiled. "Glad to hear it." By mid-afternoon, I'd convinced myself I could get through the day without thinking about the CEO's office, without thinking about Ethan, without thinking about how those two things might be connected. Then the message popped up on my screen. "Can you stop by before you leave today?" This time it was from him directly. No assistant, no buffer. I stared at the words, my chest tightening again. Around me, the office carried on. Phones rang, chairs rolled back and forth. Someone complained about the printer. I typed back a simple yes. The hours that followed stretched thin. Every sound felt sharper, every movement felt watched, even though no one was looking at me any differently than they had the day before. When the office began to empty again, I stood, smoothed my blouse, and picked up my coat. The walk to the executive floor felt familiar now, which unsettled me more than if it had been new. His door was closed this time. I knocked softly. "Come in," he said. He was sitting now, glasses on, a document open in front of him. He looked up and removed them when he saw me. "Sarah," he said. "Thank you. I sat without being asked." He folded his hands on the desk. "I didn't sleep much last night," he said. "Neither did I, but I didn't say that. I want to be clear," he continued. "This conversation isn't disciplinary, it's personal. And if you want to stop it at any point, we will—" I nodded, my throat too tight for words. 8 months ago, he said, I noticed your name during onboarding. I stilled. Not because of your resume, he added quickly. Because of a reference. My heart dropped. D. I don't usually involve myself in those details, he said. But this one caught my attention. He paused, watching my reaction carefully. The reference came from someone I knew, he said. Someone I haven't spoken to in a long time. I thought of the envelope on my kitchen table, of the handwriting, of the name that refused to stay buried. Ethan Moore, he said. The sound of it in someone else's voice felt like a door slamming shut somewhere inside me. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. Yes, I said quietly. He leaned back slightly, exhaling. I thought so. The room went silent again. Not awkward, just heavy. I want you to know, he said, that I didn't bring you here to dredge up old wounds. I looked at my hands instead of his face. They were trembling slightly. I curled them into my lap to hide it. But I can't ignore the overlap, he continued. And I won't pretend it doesn't exist. I finally looked up. What overlap? I asked. His expression softened. Just a fraction. Because, he said gently, 8 months ago, you didn't just walk into this building with a resume. He paused. You walked in connected to a part of my life I never expected to see again. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about my past knocking on the door. It was about his, and whatever was coming next was going to belong to both of us. He didn't say anything right away after that. Neither did I. The space between us filled with the soft hum of the building settling for the night. Somewhere below, an elevator chimed. A door opened. Closed again. Life continuing, indifferent. I waited for him to explain. I didn't trust myself to ask the right question. Finn. Allie, he stood and walked toward the window, the same place he'd stood the night before. The city lights were brighter now, sharper against the dark. Reflections layered over reflections, like there were two versions of the room at once. Ethan and I grew up together, he said, without turning around. The words landed quietly. No drama, no build-up. He lived 2 houses down from mine, same schools, same neighborhood. He paused. Same mistakes. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He wasn't a bad person, the CEO continued. Not at first. He was restless, always wanted more than what was right in front of him. I nodded once. It felt strange to agree with him, but it was true. We lost touch after college, he said. Life went in different directions. I built this. He gestured loosely around the room. He didn't. Still, I stayed quiet. This wasn't my story to interrupt. Not yet. About 10 years ago, he went on, he reached out. My stomach tightened. He needed help. Said he'd messed up. That he just needed one opportunity to get back on his feet. I shifted in my chair, my coat slipping slightly to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, grateful for the movement, for something to do with my hands. I helped him, he said. That part didn't surprise me. It fit with everything I'd seen of him so far. The quiet control, the measured decisions. I brought him into one of our smaller ventures, he said. Not this company, something earlier. Gave him responsibility, access. He turned then, finally looking at me. I trusted him. The word hung in the air between us. I swallowed. What happened? He hesitated, just for a moment. The first crack I'd seen in his composure. He broke that trust, he said simply. No anger, no bitterness, just fact. He made decisions that weren't his to make. Took shortcuts, moved money where it didn't belong. I felt a dull ache settle in my chest. Not shock, recognition. When it came out, he continued, I gave him a choice. Accountability, or walking away quietly. My heart sank. He chose to walk. Of course he did. He disappeared after that, the CEO said. Changed numbers, changed addresses. I assumed that chapter was closed. He looked at me carefully now, like he was gauging how much I already knew. And then, he said, your name showed up. I shifted again, uncomfortable. I didn't know, I said quickly, about any of that. I believe you, he replied without hesitation. That surprised me enough that I looked up fully. I do, he said again, because if you had known, you wouldn't have taken the risk. I nodded slowly. That was true. I met Ethan years after that, I said. My voice felt steadier than I expected. After everything you're describing, he inclined his head slightly, encouraging me to continue. He was charming, I said. Careful. He talked about starting over, about learning from mistakes. I almost laughed at the memory, but the sound caught in my throat. He told me he worked in consulting, I added. Never said where. Never mentioned you. The CEO exhaled through his nose. He wouldn't have. No, I agreed. We worked together, I continued. Different firm. Short-term project. That part was technically true, just incomplete. At first, I said, he was supportive, encouraging. He said I had potential. I paused, choosing my words carefully. But eventually, things shifted. The room seemed to lean in around us. He started using my work as his own, I said, redirecting conversations, making me feel like I owed him for opportunities I'd already earned. The CEO's jaw tightened slightly. He said nothing. When I confronted him, I went on. He told me I was being emotional, that I should be grateful. I swallowed hard. I left, I said, the firm. Not because I wanted to, but because staying felt impossible. That was as close as I came to saying the truth. He walked back to his desk and sat down slowly, like his body suddenly felt heavier. I'm sorry, he said. It was the first time he'd said that, and it hit harder than I expected. I didn't know he did that to you, he added. But I can't say I'm surprised. I nodded, staring at the edge of the desk. For what it's worth, he said, that behavior didn't start with you. I believed him. We sat in silence again, the weight of a shared history neither of us had asked for. Then he spoke, carefully. 2 weeks ago, he said, Ethan contacted me. My breath caught. He said he wanted to make things right, the CEO continued, that he was sick. That time was shorter than he expected. The room seemed to tilt. He asked to meet, he said, to talk, to apologize. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again. And? I asked. I didn't respond, he said. Not at first. I nodded. I understood that too. But then, he said, he mentioned you. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. He said he'd seen your name online, that you were working here, that you deserved to know the full story. I thought of envelope, the careful handwriting, the lack of accusation. He said, the CEO continued, that if I didn't talk to you, he would. My fingers curled tightly in my lap. I didn't want you blindsided, he said, and I didn't want him controlling the narrative. Not again. I let out a shaky breath. So you waited 8 months? He nodded. I needed to be sure. About you, about your work, about whether this was coincidence or something more calculated. And, I asked quietly. And I'm sure now, he said. You didn't come here for him. The relief was sharp and unexpected. It stung behind my eyes. I appreciate that, I said. There's more, he said gently. I braced myself. He wants to meet you, he said, with me present. The words landed softly, but they echoed. I told him I wouldn't agree unless you wanted it, he added quickly. This is your choice. I stared at the desk, my mind racing. The idea of seeing Ethan again made my chest tighten, but so did the thought of never having answers, of letting him control the ending by disappearing again. What happens if I say no? I asked. Nothing, the CEO said. You keep your job. Your life stays intact. And if I say yes? He hesitated. Then some things might finally be put where they belong. I thought of the nights I'd replayed conversations, the doubts that had followed me into every meeting since, the way I'd shrunk myself to avoid being taken again. I don't want this to affect my work, I said. It won't, he said immediately, no matter what you choose. I studied his face. He meant it. Where is he? I asked. He took a breath. Nearby. In the city. That made it worse somehow. When? I asked. Whenever you're ready, he said. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion washing over me. 8 months of silence, of careful distance, and now this. I need time, I said. Of course, he replied. I stood, my legs unsteady. As I reached for my coat, he spoke again. Sarah, I turned. I didn't bring you into this company because of him, he said, and I won't let him define what happens next. I nodded, grateful and overwhelmed all at once. When I left the building that night, the air felt heavier, the city lights harsher. I walked without direction, my thoughts tangled. The twist wasn't that Ethan had resurfaced. It was that he hadn't been gone at all. He'd just been waiting. And now, after all this time, the story I thought I'd escaped was asking to be finished. I didn't call Ethan right away. Days passed. Then a week. Life kept moving in small, ordinary ways that felt almost cruel in their normalcy. Meetings, deadlines, grocery runs, laundry folding that never quite felt finished. The world didn't pause just because something unresolved was knocking at my door. At work, nothing changed on the surface. The CEO didn't summon me again. No whispers followed me down hallways. My name stayed where it belonged, on emails, on project documents, on a small plaque by my desk that most people never noticed. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made everything feel heavier, because now I knew something no one else did, and carrying it alone had become its own kind of work. I found myself listening more than usual, watching the way people moved through the office, how easily they joked in the break room, how confidently they spoke in meetings. How they assumed tomorrow would look like today. I used to be like that. At night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments I'd buried. Not the obvious ones, the quieter ones. The way Ethan had praised my work in public and dismissed my concerns in private. The way he'd smiled when I hesitated, like hesitation was something he could use. The envelope stayed on my kitchen table. I didn't open it again. I didn't throw it away. Every morning I walked past it. Every night I glanced at it before turning out the light. One evening, as I stood washing dishes I didn't need to wash yet, my phone rang. Unknown number. I froze. The water kept running, the sound filling the room. I stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it. Not then. Instead, I dried my hands slowly and leaned against the counter, my forehead resting briefly against the cabinet. My breath felt shallow, like I'd been holding it without realizing. The phone buzzed again. A text, this time. I don't expect forgiveness. Just a conversation. No name, no explanation. I sat down at the table, the chair scraping softly against the floor. My hands trembled as I placed the phone face down beside the envelope. For a long time I did nothing. Then I did something small. I picked up the envelope and slid the letter out again. The words hadn't changed. They still didn't ask for anything except time. Still didn't explain, still didn't apologize. But now, knowing what I knew, I read between the lines. This wasn't closure he was offering. It was control over the ending. That night, I finally listened to the voicemail. His voice sounded older, thinner somehow, still familiar enough to make my stomach twist. "Sarah," he said softly, "I know I don't deserve a response. I don't have many chances left to make things right." He paused, breathing uneven. "I understand if you don't want to see me alone. I've already spoken to him. I won't push." There it was. The confirmation. "He said you were doing well," Ethan continued. "I'm glad. You always were capable of more than I let you have." The words felt like salt in an old wound. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I just want you to hear the truth. From me." The message ended there. I sat in silence, the phone heavy in my hand. Hearing his voice didn't bring the release I'd imagined. It brought anger, not loud, explosive anger. Something quieter, heavier. The kind that settles in your chest and refuses to move. I thought about the CEO's office, about his restraint, about how he'd carried his own history without letting it spill into every conversation. I wondered how many nights he'd lain awake too, replaying choices he couldn't undo. 2 days later, I sent a single message. "I'll meet, not alone." The response came almost immediately. "Thank you, nothing else." We agreed on a time and place through the CEO's assistant. Neutral, a private conference room in a building I'd never been to before. No connection to my work. No connection to Ethan's past ventures. The morning of the meeting, my hands shook as I buttoned my blouse. I had to redo it twice. My reflection in the mirror looked steady enough, but I knew better. I considered calling in sick, inventing a reason, letting time do what it always did, smooth over. Rough edges until they lost definition. But this wasn't something time could fix. The ride over felt surreal. I watched the city pass by through the car window, noticing details I usually ignored. A woman walking her dog, headphones in, a man reading on a park bench, a child tugging at his mother's sleeve, all of them moving forward, unburdened by the past that waited for me. The conference room was already occupied when I arrived. The CEO stood near the window, his posture composed as always. He nodded when he saw me, a quiet acknowledgement. Ethan sat at the table. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. His hair was grayer at the temples. The confidence he used to wear so easily now sat unevenly on him like something borrowed. He stood when he saw me. "Sarah," he said. I didn't respond. I took the chair farthest from him and sat down, placing my bag carefully at my feet. We didn't shake hands. The CEO closed the door and took the seat between us, slightly angled toward me. It wasn't subtle, and I appreciated that. For a moment no one spoke. Then Ethan cleared his throat. "I'll start," he said. "If that's okay." I didn't nod. I didn't stop him. "I owe you an apology," he said. "More than one." I watched his hands as he spoke. They moved less than they used to. No dramatic gestures, no performance. "I took credit for your work," he continued. "I minimized you. I made you feel small so I could feel bigger." My jaw tightened. "That was wrong," he said, and I knew it then. The room stayed quiet. "I didn't reach out sooner because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you wouldn't need me anymore. Afraid you'd moved on." I almost laughed. "Almo, Saint, you didn't ruin my career," he said, "but you damaged something more important." He looked at me then, eyes unsteady. "My trust in myself," I said before I could stop myself. He nodded. "Yes." The CEO stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Ethan said. "I don't expect it." I shifted in my chair. "Then why now?" He hesitated. "Because I don't have much time." The words landed heavily. The CEO spoke then. "You don't need to share details." "I want to," Ethan said. "It's cancer." The room felt suddenly too small. "I don't know how long I have," he continued. "Months, maybe less." I felt something twist in my chest. Not pity, not relief. Complexity. "I wanted to make sure the damage I caused didn't go unspoken," he said. "That you knew it wasn't your fault." I took a slow breath. My voice, when it came, surprised me with its steadiness. "I didn't need you to be sick to understand that," I said. He flinched, just slightly. "I needed you to stop pretending you helped me," I continued, "because what you did followed me longer than you realize." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I know," he said quietly. We sat in silence again, the kind that didn't rush. Finally, the CEO looked at me. "You don't owe either of us anything," he said. "Whatever you need from this moment, say it." I thought about that. What did I need? Not an apology. I had that now. Not an explanation. I'd built my own. "I need this to be the last time you speak about me as part of your redemption," I said, looking directly at Ethan. He swallowed. "That's fair. And I need you to know," I added, "that I'm not carrying this anymore." He nodded again, slower this time. "I hope you find peace," I said. And I meant it, in the way you mean something without wanting to be close to it. We stood shortly after. No hugs, no grand conclusions. As I walked out of the building, the air felt different. Lighter, but not in a triumphant way. More like I'd finally set something down I'd been carrying for too long. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer had a voice in my present, and that felt like something close to freedom. The weeks after the meeting passed more quietly than I expected. Not in the dramatic way people talk about closure, where everything suddenly feels resolved and light pours in through open windows. It was quieter in a smaller, steadier sense, like the low hum of anxiety that had lived in my chest for years had finally turned itself down. I noticed it in ordinary moments. The way I slept through the night without waking at 3 in the morning, my mind racing through old conversations. The way my shoulders didn't tense every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The way I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head for things no one was asking me to explain anymore. At work, I started speaking a little more in meetings. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a sentence here, a clarification there. I didn't try to dominate the room, I just stopped shrinking myself to fit into it. The first time I disagreed openly with someone, my heart raced so hard I thought it might give me away. But no one reacted the way I'd feared. No one rolled their eyes or dismissed me. They listened. They adjusted. Mark caught my eye afterward and gave me a small nod, like he'd noticed something. Shift. "Good point back there," he said later, casually, as if it had always been that way. "Thanks," I replied, and meant more than just the word. The CEO didn't mention Ethan again. He didn't need to. Instead, a month later, he asked me to join a strategy session I would have declined before without thinking. This time, I hesitated only long enough to steady my breath. "I'd like that," I said. The meeting was challenging. I stumbled once or twice, corrected myself, kept going. When it ended, he thanked everyone and held the door for me as we walked out. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "So did you," I replied. He smiled slightly, not the polished one he used publicly. Something more human. Outside of work, my life remained mostly the same. Same apartment, same walking routes, same small routines. But they felt different now, like I was inhabiting them more fully. One evening, as I sorted through a stack of mail I'd been ignoring, I came across another envelope. This one had a return address. My chest tightened for a brief moment before I reminded myself to breathe. Inside was a short note from the CEO's assistant. "I thought you should know," it read. "He passed away this morning. No details, no expectations, just information." I sat at the table for a long time after that, the note resting beside my untouched dinner. I didn't cry right away. I didn't feel relief either. What I felt was stillness. I thought about Ethan as he'd been at the end. Smaller, quieter, finally honest in a way he hadn't been before. I thought about the version of him I'd met years ago, the one who made me doubt myself without ever raising his voice. Both could be Rue, and neither got to define me anymore. Later that night, I took the envelope that had sat on my kitchen table for months and carried it to the trash. I hesitated for just a second, then dropped it in and didn't look back. I expected something to surge up inside me, regret, sadness, anger. Instead, there was space. The next morning, I walked to work without headphones. I listened to the city instead. The uneven rhythm of footsteps on the sidewalk, a car horn in the distance, someone laughing too loudly outside a cafe. It all sounded grounding, real. At my desk, I opened my laptop and began my day like any other. Emails, notes, a calendar full of small commitments that added up to something meaningful. At noon, I took my lunch to the park instead of the stairwell. I sat on a bench and watched people pass by, noticing how everyone seemed to be carrying something invisible. I wasn't special in that way. I was just lighter. In the afternoon, my manager stopped by. "We're thinking of expanding your role," she said. "If you're interested." I felt a familiar flicker of hesitation rise up. The old instinct to deflect, to say maybe later, to stay safe where expectations were low. Then I thought about the conference room, about naming what I needed out loud, about choosing not to let fear make decisions for me anymore. "I'm interested," I said. She smiled. "Good. I thought you might be." That evening, as the office emptied around me, I stayed a little longer, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to finish what I'd started. When I finally shut down my computer, the building was quiet again, but it didn't feel hollow. As I rode the elevator down, I caught my reflection in the metal walls. I looked the same, but I wasn't. Outside, the sky had turned that soft shade of blue that comes just before night fully settles in. The air was cool, and for once, I didn't rush. I walked home slowly, letting the city move around me. Some stories don't end with triumph or applause. They end with something smaller, something steadier. A person standing in their own life, no longer bracing for the past to reach out and pull them backward. And that was enough. Final ending reflection. If you'd asked me 8 months ago why my CEO would ever confront me, I would have assumed I'd failed somehow, that I'd missed a deadline, broken an unspoken rule, taken up too much space. The truth was quieter and harder and more human than that. He confronted me because the past doesn't disappear on its own. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it asks to be seen so it can finally be put down. What surprised me most wasn't being recognized. It was realizing I was ready to be, not to be forgiven, not to be understood by everyone, just to stop hiding from a story that had already ended, and to start living the one that came after,